So good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to this is our 7th annual volunteer conference, believe it or not. And it's lovely to see so many familiar faces and also some new faces. And I'd like to do a particular shout out to the new volunteers from the Out West and Cork, the new recruits from Out West and Cork, and also to welcome in some of our new peer support facilitators who were trained recently. So welcome to Jenny and to Mary. It's great to have you here. And also to welcome Hannah. Hannah's here from Tenny, the family support worker from Tenny, who co-manages our transgender family line and who's joining our first session on intersex rights. So Hannah, it's lovely to have you here. This is a very special year for the National LGBT Helpline as it marks our 10th anniversary. And you'll be seeing our logo, our 10th anniversary logo later on today. And the strapline for our 10th anniversary is "Change is a constant, and so are we." And we chose that logo really for two reasons. Firstly, because the LGBT Helpline has been available through a decade of really, I suppose, transformative change, positive change for the LGBTI plus community. And while that has thankfully been very positive change, it was hard fought for and painfully won. And I suppose it's been so important over the last 10 years to have the service and have the support for people. And as we move into a new decade, it is as much needed now as it ever was. And the second reason why we chose the strapline "Change is a constant, and so are we" is because of the year that's in it. It's been an incredibly difficult year with the COVID pandemic. And we've managed to maintain our service. The helpline stayed open uninterrupted since lockdown began. And that's down to every single one of you here on this call and the other volunteers who couldn't join us here today. And I suppose we hear the feedback we've got a lot of feedback, I suppose, from individuals, but most importantly, in a way, from other LGBTI plus organisations who are telling us that it really mattered to them and to the people they work with that the helpline was open, particularly at the early days of the restrictions. And people have told us that it helped them feel supported and less anxious, even if they never picked up the phone or never made a chat. It just meant they knew that we were there, and it helped really to ease the anxiety. You might have seen we recently ran the LGBTI Life in Lockdown survey, and we had a phenomenal response. We got 2,000 responses within less than 4 weeks. And I suppose what the survey shows us is that over 60% of people reported a decline in their mental health. Over 40% of people reported a decline in their physical health. And worryingly, almost 60% of people said they stopped engaging with the LGBTI plus community and with their friends and social networks. So I suppose that tells us really that our service, our helplines, our chat, our peer support groups are needed now more than ever. So I suppose I just want you to know that the importance of the work that you all do and the importance really that the service is here. I suppose today is about equipping us with the extra knowledge that we can bring to the work and the services. And we have 3 very important topics that we're going to cover, 2 this morning and 1 this afternoon, that came up through the volunteer survey. And thanks to everyone for filling that out, because it really gives us a picture of what you need, what you feel you need to help you in your work. But today is also a chance to see each other, to connect with each other. I know it's not as good as when we meet up in person, and we will be there again, hopefully next year. And while it's definitely more of a challenge online, we will do our best this morning and throughout the day to use breakout rooms so that we can connect and we can discuss and we can talk through the issues together. And perhaps most importantly, the year that's in it. There will be an opportunity later on today to nourish ourselves and to take away some well-being tools and tips that will help us in our work as we head into the coming months. And we're very lucky to have Dr. Tony Bates. He's the founder of Jigsaw Mental Health Service and a very renowned psychologist and well-being guru. And he's going to join us later on this afternoon. So I would encourage you, I know it can be hard to be online for a long time, but I would encourage you to stay with it, because I think it will help us, those tips in the months ahead. And then at 4:45 then, we're very lucky, we have a very special guest dropping in to give her take on the past decade and why our service is needed now more than ever. So we'll have no other than our very own Queen of Ireland, Panty Bliss, dropping in to have a chat. And Panty will also announce the winner of this year's Above and Beyond Award. So you'll get to hear all of you sent in your nominations, and you'll get to hear who has been chosen this year to win the award. You all go above and beyond. You all give so much of yourselves throughout the year. So it is a very, I suppose, important thing for the person selected. It is a very meaningful thing to be selected for the award. So we look forward to that. And then finally, we'll hear the closing remarks from our chairperson, Bernadine Quinn, a woman who's been central to the development and the growth of the helpline since the helpline was just an idea over a decade ago. So I think it's fitting, particularly the year that's in it, that the last word will go to Bernie. Throughout today, we'll also, to mark our 10th anniversary, we'll also be showing some messages of support from well-known supporters of our service. And we understand that it can be tiring being online, and many of you are working online all week. So a couple of just final housekeeping issues is really to aid the quality of sound, that people just stay on mute. If you have a question at the panel discussions, just pop it into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And we will be monitoring the chat box. Claire will be working away in the background, monitoring the questions and sending them to the panelists. And then also, of course, we'll have the breakout rooms where you can take yourself off mute and have a discussion. So finally, I want to say a massive thank you to the staff team here in LGBT Ireland, to Colette, to Claire, to Stephen and James, for all your work in organising today. We're a huge team in LGBT Ireland. You'll see that throughout the day. We're much bigger than the staff team, and I suppose that's how we can get through the work that we do, because of everyone that's on this call today and the other 30 people who couldn't join us. So sit back, everyone, enjoy the day, and I'll see you throughout the day in the breakout rooms. And firstly, we're going to hear from somebody who's, I suppose, very special to the community, to wish us well. And then we'll start our first panel, and I'll hand over to, I wanted to say this all week, I'm going to say roll it there, Colette, for our first panel discussion. So thank you all, and I'll see you throughout the day.
This is David Norris here. I'm delighted and honoured to be invited to be an ambassador for the LGBT community in Ireland, and particularly with regard to the LGBT phone line. I want to congratulate the people involved for the first wonderful 10 years of this service. It's particularly important now, especially when people are suffering from mental health difficulties with regard to the COVID-19 situation and the pressures that are placed on young people and old people and everybody in the community through the restrictions. So well done, congratulations, and keep going.
So now roll it there, Colette, and Colette, you're on mute.
Paula, you wanted to say roll it there, Colette, twice. Well, you did it. And I've caught the rolling ball. And good morning, everybody, from myself, and how wonderful it was there to have the vox pop from David Norris. Very, very meaningful, and reminding us, I suppose, of just a very special year that we're celebrating this year, and the special nature of our conference this year also. We're going to have it as interactive as we can, as Paula outlined, and hopefully the content reflects, you know, some of the current learning issues that you have as helpline volunteers. And thanks again for the volunteer survey. It really is a vital tool in all of us designing and organising the conference. So folks, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest panelist for our first session. Olive, you're showing up on screen as Olive Hogan. I know you as Olive Wilson, but you can let us know how you'd like to be called. But just to welcome you and to thank you for giving up precious time early on a Saturday morning to speak with us about Intersex Ireland, about your own story, and about intersex awareness in general. So we're gonna, folks, just to outline, we'll take 20-25 minutes listening and interacting with Olive. Then we'll go into breakout rooms as Paula described, and in each breakout room there'll be, you know, one of us to just kind of guide the discussion a little bit. The breakout rooms will be about 15 minutes or so, a little bit longer if we judge that's needed. And within the breakout rooms, you can be grounding, I suppose, what Olive has shared in terms of any of your own experiences of supporting intersex people, either on the helpline or on the chat, or any of the questions you'd like to come back to Olive with for the last part of our session, which will be the Q&A. Okay, so Olive, very warm welcome once again. I remember meeting you first, Olive, and I was so excited to meet you at the Pride conference. Was it last year in June, where you kind of went up on the stage, you asked for time to have the microphone to make all of us aware that Intersex Ireland now exists, and that where is the I? Every time we use LGBT, where is the I, and are we using the I? And you were just so passionate about bringing visibility and awareness to all of us in the community, and especially all of the organizations and all of the services. So I'm really, really pleased and grateful that you're here. And maybe could I just start by asking you to tell us a little bit just about who you are. Who is Olive?
Hi, Colette. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak today. You do great work, and the helpline does fantastic work. I was always quite feminine. I was very feminine, very girly, and my favorite things would have been brownies, my Cindy doll, my I would have been into like dresses. I was very girly from quite an age, and when I was around 13, 14, I wasn't developing like other kids, and like textbook development is all we're given in school.
Yes.
A boy goes this way, a girl goes that way. There's a linear binary system, you know, and your body will develop, and that's it. And there was such a sense of internal panic in me, because it was almost like someone had glued the pages of the biology book together, and I had gone from this page to that page. I wasn't supposed to be developing facial hair.
Right.
I was supposed to be, you know, I had menstrual difficulties. That wasn't supposed to be part of this.
Yes.
And there was such I didn't know who to tell. I didn't know who to talk to. I just remember absolute panic as a young teenager, and not telling anyone, and just plucking out the hairs, and literally just panicking.
Right.
And realizing my friends weren't going through any of this. And then when I was around, I have a condition called extreme PCOS. And I don't know, has anyone seen the film The Greatest Showman?
Yes.
The character in that the woman in that has extreme PCOS.
Yes.
And it's you have a lot more testosterone than the average woman would have in her system,
Right.
and that can then lead to secondary characteristics.
Mm.
But it was you know, being diagnosed and that, and getting no support, no counseling, no help. This is it. And I remember being met by a social worker who was a nun, being told I would be fixed, and they could fix me.
And Olive, may I ask, how did you even arrive at getting that diagnosis? Did you talk to your parents? Did they bring you to the doctor? How did all that even work?
I was in an institution at the time, and I was arranged through them, but there was I wasn't developing like your average young person.
Okay.
And but it is very emotionally, and it's a time that it's so difficult for a young person, and that's why I'm delighted to be able to speak here today, and for the opportunity, because if a young person who I was at that time rings in, that the volunteers will be able to support them.
Yes.
So thanks so much for that opportunity.
Absolutely. So Olive, that's precisely, I suppose, the reason why we're having this session, and that we want to learn from you as much as we can, so that our helpline volunteers feel, you know, as equipped as possible to support anybody who's contacting us who may be experiencing anything of what you experienced. Could you I know there are some general definitions of intersex, Olive, and then there's lots of complexity to intersex. Could you give us a sense of what may be general about intersex people, and what's the complexity then, and the diversity within intersex people?
Well, I'll use the definition that Intersex Ireland used. Now, our group is the second biggest group for intersex people in Europe. Like, we're actually quite numeric, and we're a face-to-face Irish group. But I'll use our definition. Intersex people are individuals born with any of several variations in sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, or genitals that do not fit the typical definition for male and female bodies. Now, there's actually 47 different intersex conditions, and of those 47, some of them would be divided in subdivided as well. Within our group, we actually, all of our members have different variations, have different intersex conditions. Each and every one of us is completely different. And I think the thing, most intersex people are straight, and we can be male, female, non-binary. We can be, you know, there's trans or cis. We can be, you know, it's a very, very varied community.
Right. So there's a lot of diversity in the community. What do you think then, Olive, what are some of like the main challenges, the main difficulties that intersex people face generally, and then maybe particularly here in Ireland? Could you tell us about that? Like, what is it like to be intersex in Ireland today?
Well, from the time you're born, there's difficulties, because within 3 months, the parents must register a gender. That's the law. So, you know, they must decide whether the child is male or female. So if a child is born with ambiguous genitalia, a decision is made. And in Ireland, unfortunately, we still have not banned surgery on intersex babies. So the UN is totally against this. It's actually, you know, we have made genital mutilation illegal in Ireland. In fact, you can actually be jailed, and also you can be jailed if you bring a baby out of the country for genital mutilation.
Yes.
And there's long-term effects of genital mutilation. We see, the intersex community refer to surgery on intersex babies as genital mutilation as well.
Yes.
And you will have things like ongoing pain, difficulty, pain around sexual intercourse. There's psychological distress. There's a number of different problems that surgery brings with it.
Yes.
And also then, if the person if the doctor ascribes the wrong gender on the baby, and actually says they're male. I mean, for a doctor to be able to choose the gender of a child it's horrendous in the first place.
Yes.
You know, but for a doctor to be able to choose and place the wrong label on a baby, and suddenly the child is growing up in a gender they do not identify with.
Yes.
And that, but also if that child at that stage, if surgery is done on that baby, suddenly you're trying later on in life as an adult to do affirming surgery, and what it is surgery on scar tissue, which is incredibly complex. It's much more complex than the surgery that's done for somebody who's transgendered.
Yes.
It's much more difficult, and the outcome is much worse. There's much more likely to be complications. You know, it's a much more difficult situation.
Right. So, Olive, what I'm taking from you in that piece is that, like, there's a contradiction in Ireland, that on the one hand, we recognize in certain cultural religious practices where female genital mutilation is considered, you know, a cultural and religious practice, we've criminalized that in Ireland. We have laws, and we've actually prosecuted parents, I think a year and a half ago, and sentenced them to 3 or 4 years in prison because of facilitating female genital mutilation on their baby girl. Whereas genital mutilation is happening to intersex babies all the time in Irish maternity hospitals, and we don't see that as genital mutilation. Yeah. Could you tell us what you know about the number of intersex babies who are born in Ireland, and, you know, what the general, you know, what are maternity hospitals thinking about this? Like, are they just really not understanding intersex? Do they have a particular opinion about intersex? Could you give us a bit of understanding about that?
It's estimated that about 1.7% of the population are intersex. There's actually more intersex people in the world than there are people with red hair. Wow. So it's very hidden.
Yeah.
And you know, and even you're told, like, just to keep this to yourself, like, you know, this is not, and it's very much from birth, like there is the male female division and that's it. And but yeah, there is a lot of intersex people in Ireland, yes.
Yeah. And generally then, at the maternity hospital level, Olive, what's your assessment of, you know, what happens there? Is it just lack of awareness? When the maternity hospitals are doing what for intersex people you consider genital mutilation, but I presume when they're doing it, they don't feel they're doing genital mutilation, do they? Is there just such a lack of awareness, or?
There's a lack of awareness, and also it's called normalizing surgery. Oh. Because they feel the child would then have a much better chance of growing up and living a normal life. Mm-hmm. But our view has always been that you don't need, like, our flag is yellow with a purple a purple ring, and that's so strong within our community. Is we are not broken. We don't need to be fixed. They don't need to do surgery on us. And dress the child in yellow. You don't have to put them in pink or blue. You know, you don't have to stamp a label on them. And that's something we're very, very strong on as a community, that this, you know, and the UN totally is against surgery on intersex babies. It's something they strongly condemn, and they want it banned. And quite a number of states, I think it was 62 at the last, have actually banned surgery on intersex babies, but Ireland hasn't. We're still carrying it out.
Okay.
And also there's a difficulty with people coming from other cultures, because some cultures are more progressive on intersex rights, such as Iceland, and some, such as African countries, the child can be seen, the baby, as a bad omen. And in a lot of countries, such as Uganda and Kenya in particular, those babies are murdered at birth, often because they're seen that if they bring bad luck into a community, that the person who gave birth to that baby is responsible for bringing the bad luck into the community. So Ireland is a multicultural country, and that's something we need to take on board as well.
Yes, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit then about like what's so positive and progressive in Iceland?
The children are embraced. They're allowed to be themselves. And we had a conference in Zagreb, and we met with all different peoples from all different cultures, including the children, all who are intersex. And probably the most progressive, and we were able to discuss how our country treats intersex people. And probably the most progressive would have been Iceland. The children are allowed to grow up being themselves. That's the one thing we found.
So they're not assigned a legal gender within 3 months?
No, with the legal system is different, you know. So
Okay.
it's a more progressive, it's much more progressive in intersex rights. And probably the worst would have been the African countries, with people there who came from Nigeria, and they experienced huge discrimination and huge difficulty.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Olive, can you tell us a little bit about just what Intersex Ireland, you know, how did you come to organize Intersex Ireland, to start it up? And how many of you are there, and what are some of the things that you do?
Our first, the LGBT Ireland strategy, that was our first meeting in Wynn's Hotel. And we actually met at that stage because there's a feeling that intersex has been ignored within Ireland, really, completely ignored. And we wanted to come together as intersex people and do something about it. So, and put forward what we actually needed as intersex people. And again, the banning of surgery would be one. Comprehensive sex education in schools for intersex children. There was a variety of things that we actually need. You know, there's no funding. There's absolutely, we receive no funding. So we're actually trying to support nearly 2% of the population with no funding. Right. So yeah, and like we would get a lot of people calling us and that, and emailing us asking for help, support.
Right, right. And when people email and call you, Olive, what are you able to, you know, what have you done? I know you're doing amazing work. Can you give some examples of how you support people?
Meeting with them, meeting with them physically. Sometimes to actually, because a lot of their fears, particularly around with parents that are wondering, should they get in, it's good to get surgery, or what's their child's life going to be like? And you can meet with them and say, listen, we've partners, we've jobs, we've lives, we've completely normal lives. We have friends. We like your child doesn't need to be mutilated to have a good future. Yes. And also just for them to realize that intersex people exist, we're normal, we're just like everyone else. And I think when they realize that, and that connection, because if they've never met anyone else who's intersex and they're being recommended surgery on their baby, a lot of the times they don't know what to do. Yes. Yeah. There's a panic. There is a panic in a lot of them. And also then people over the time, like, so when somebody's been diagnosed, sometimes the parents of intersex babies can be told to conceal the fact their child is intersex, get the surgery and just get on with their lives. And sometimes when they find out at an older age, there's such a level of devastation. So a lot of our work really is support. Sometimes they're being bullied in school. A child is, with my own condition, the one thing is you put on weight very easily, and you also can grow a beard. Now, a teenage girl going into school with a beard, like, you can imagine the bullying, you know, and she's trying to get electrolysis, or she's trying to actually deal with the situation. And it can lead to a lot of psychological problems if they're not given the correct support, and actually, to be embraced, I think, and to be realized that diversity and difference is not necessarily negative. Of course, yeah. And Olive, so Intersex Ireland is supporting intersex people who are reaching out for help, and also maybe parents of intersex people, is that right? Yeah, everyone. and medical professionals, and we're talking to the HSC, and we're talking to governmental bodies, and we're talking to, you know, we are the only organisation for intersex people in Ireland. Now, thankfully, we have grown. As I said, we're the second largest group in Europe for intersex people.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, there's so much work that we're doing.
Yeah, because I think, Olive, even though Intersex Ireland is the second largest intersex organisation in Europe, you're about 11 or 12 people.
Yeah.
So that's showing the level of invisibility,
yeah,
of intersex people across Europe even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hidden, and what you'll find is people will plead with you not to tell anyone, and when you meet with them, you're sworn to confidentiality. It's almost like, for me, dealing with the gay community back in the 1980s, 90s, where there's such a fear and there's such a stigma. And you know, it's because, I suppose, particularly if you're heterosexual and suddenly, you know, they may, if they're from a very rural area, we just thinking one woman in particular, she's in a very rural area, was married, and her husband was a farmer, and she suddenly realized she wasn't getting pregnant, and she hadn't had, you know, she was having difficulties around her menstrual, you know, cycle, and was abstinent, and she was diagnosed with an intersex condition, and the panic that family went into, because there was no awareness and there was no knowledge of this, and they'd never met anyone like this situation, and I think there was a terrible fear of the unknown. They just didn't know, you know, what they were dealing with.
Okay. And maybe, Olive, one more question, just to open things up before we go into the breakout rooms. And that question is, can you tell us a little bit, on the one hand, the intersex community, some of the intersex community want the I very much as part of the LGBTI.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the others of the intersex community, they don't see themselves as connected to the LGBT community at all. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
But with the woman I described just there now, she's one of our members. Well, she's a member of Intersex Ireland. She would have felt that, but I'm not gay, I'm not a lesbian, I you know, and she had no knowledge of the gay community. She didn't know anyone who was, you know, she thought she didn't know anyone who was lesbian or gay. So the idea then of her becoming member of a community and feeling connected to that community wouldn't, you know, have been really. But a lot of people within intersex, the intersex community globally actually do, because I think it is easier for people who are LGBT to come out as intersex.
Right. Yes.
Because it's less of a shock within our community than it may be within a very traditional farming rural community.
Yes.
Heterosexual, you know, depending on the community that you're from. But certainly I wouldn't have had any I was expecting adverse reactions when I come out, but I just thought, we have to do this for the younger generation. The stigma and fear and secrecy has to go. But I actually haven't. I've received huge support from the wider LGBT community.
Fantastic. Okay, Olive, thank you so much for laying out, I think, kind of a general picture of intersex people and some of their issues and struggles, and also some of the very specific issues which show us how complex intersex is actually. What I'm going to kind of suggest now is that we go into breakout rooms. We'll take about 15 minutes or so, 15-20 minutes in your breakout rooms to just discuss together what Olive has shared, and make whatever connections with some of the people you've supported or been contacted by on our services, and just any questions that you want to bring back to Olive in the Q&A. after our breakout rooms. Okay, everyone, have a great discussion in the breakout rooms and see you back in about 15 minutes or so. Thanks to the technical team. We have our conference room fully attended. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had some good discussions, and I'm getting on the chat here some of your questions. So do carry on sending in your questions via the chat function, and I'll pick them up here. So Olive, I might just bring you some of the questions then, if that's okay. So
Yep.
The first one is, Olive, does Intersex Ireland have any group meetings, support meetings?
Yes, we do. We have hangouts at the moment because obviously the situation with COVID and that. But yes, we would meet. At the moment, we're meeting at least once a month, and we have committee meetings separate, and then we have hangouts. And so if anyone wants to attend who's intersex, wants to attend any of our hangouts, they're welcome.
Right.
If they want, you know, I was going to say we can arrange to meet them, but with lockdown we probably can't. But
yes, so are those monthly meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
But also, like, if somebody who's intersex needs support, pre-pandemic, we would have actually met them on a one-to-one, so it would have been easier for them then when they actually came to the group, and we would have talked to them and you know, we would have met them for a one-to-one for a coffee maybe a few times, and then because it is very daunting for someone just to turn up and go into a group on their, you know, that they don't know.
Yeah.
So maybe one or two of us would have met them a few times before that and actually chatted them and got to know them.
Yeah.
And but yeah, we've hangouts, and we have and anyone is welcome to come along. And usually what we do as well is we'll chat to them. We try and ease them into the group, so we'll chat to them on the phone, and you know, try and, with COVID restriction, we'll try and organise that they are eased into the group. But yes, we do meet, and we have also got on committee meetings through Hangout and through Zoom.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll get the group details and update our volunteer information folder with those details. Another question, Olive, is like, what if you were to say this is the healthcare roadmap that we want?
Yeah.
What does that look like for Intersex Ireland?
Well, the difficulty that we've had and is the fact of the Catholic Church's involvement in healthcare. We are one of the worst countries really in the world as regards to intersex rights. I was saying to you, Colette, over the break, that Croatia actually funded us to come to Zagreb for a conference because of how bad our situation is here for intersex people. 67 states have banned intersex surgery. Ireland is continuing it. And that is as a direct result of the Catholic Church's involvement, because they're totally promoted, because they need us in the binary, you see. We must be male or female. And that means do whatever you need to do to the baby to make them male or female.
Yeah. Okay. And so just a question coming in on that issue of surgery, Olive. So I think most people thought and understood that it was now illegal to do that surgery in the maternity hospitals, but are you saying it's still happening?
Yes, it's still happening.
Yeah. Okay. So so in terms of then, are there any healthcare providers that you would recommend an intersex person to go and deal with, because they are perhaps more progressive and more supportive?
Well, depending on the situation, for some intersex people, they need to get affirming surgery as a result of being wrongly labelled the wrong gender as a child. So I'm actually thinking, sorry, of their last question. I'd like to finish that first.
Yeah.
A lot of the times there's loopholes, and that's the difficulty, and it actually enables surgery to go ahead. Right. There's actually loopholes that this is necessary.
Okay.
This is medically necessary.
Okay.
And that is where we're at as regards to there isn't a complete out all ban, you know, and that's what we're looking for as intersex people.
Yeah.
You know, they have brought in some legislation, but it's certainly not sufficient, and it does not protect the children. It doesn't, you know.
Right. Because a medical expert can judge or can say under pressure from other forces that it's medically necessary, and the parents will believe that and go with that.
Once they say that, yeah, that it's not cosmetic.
Yeah, yeah.
That it's medically necessary.
Yeah,
it will go ahead, and that is the difficulty. But
right.
you must realise that these hospitals are operating from a Catholic ethos.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
And in men, they do have a history of this kind of surgery.
Yeah, yeah.
So what they would deem medically necessary, we would really question.
Yeah, okay, okay. And so then in terms of like any healthcare provider that you'd recommend, what would you recommend if for example, people contact our services? Would we just guide them to you? Would that be the best thing to do?
Because even with different, like, I don't take any medication or anything, and different. You see, there is 47 different intersex conditions, and they all have different, like they all obviously present differently. So
yes.
But I mean, the surgery, I don't know what that we would actually recommend as regards to, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult situation, because once say surgeries happen on an intersex baby, I have a close friend in our group who's Brazilian. She had the mutilation as a baby, so she had to go to England to get her affirming surgery. She ended up hemorrhaging twice when she came back to Ireland on her own, because they were trying to stitch and do surgery on scar tissue. So it's like the problem is already existing, because the surgery needs to be all out banned, for number one.
Yeah.
As regards to, I don't, like, some people find that, I suppose, to try and accept things as they are, like, okay, you don't need to take hormones to reduce testosterone. You know, your levels of testosterone are more higher than the people. So it's more about, once the person realizes that diversity is okay, they're less likely then to go the medical route.
Yes.
They're less likely to be looking for medical intervention to try and change something that's naturally occurring within themselves.
Yes.
And a lot of medical interventions are actually unnecessary.
Yes.
We would actually, you know, there's actually, I'm trying to think, is there any medical interventions that are actually necessary in intersex people? And I can't think of any that are actually necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when we were chatting yesterday or the day before, all of you were telling me that like 7 out of 10 intersex babies are absolutely healthy.
Yeah.
And they don't need any medical intervention. They just need to be let be who they are.
Yeah, I haven't met anyone that actually needs surgery. You know, I think that it would be rare. It would, as I said, I haven't met. It would be rare.
Yeah.
You know,
okay.
It would be rare.
I know that from one of the breakout rooms, Bernie wants to give a bit of feedback and ask a question or two. So,
hi, Olive. From our group, first of all, we wanted to say thank you very much for your contribution. It's not an easy thing to put yourself out there and to speak about stuff like this on front of, I suppose, strangers in a lot of cases. And we really appreciate that you did that. And thank you very, very much for that. And it will absolutely help all of us to understand better and to how we respond to calls. It will help us do that an awful lot better. So thank you so much for that. And two, I think our group had two questions. One of them was that question around, because I thought in the training I did that they were saying something about that the surgery isn't banned, but it's no longer carried out. But I think you dealt with that. You answered that question, and thanks for that. And the other question was around, what do you see any role that LGBT Ireland could play in supporting Intersex Ireland? And is there anything that we could do short term or long term, like maybe support you guys to get some research done on the numbers of intersex people, and that we could come up with some recommendations that maybe could later go into maternity packs or into healthcare services for doctors and midwives and stuff like that. So I suppose it's a two-pronged question. One is, what could you see us doing as LGBT Ireland doing to support Intersex Ireland? And could one of those things be helping to maybe get some funding for research on intersex in Ireland?
Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Bernie. Thanks very much. Yeah, definitely. Like, the more research we do, like, it's like that there's such an invisibility and lack of awareness and lack of knowledge that definitely as regards, I think that I'm delighted that that to be able to give them this opportunity, because I think for our volunteers, for us to be able to say to a young person that LGBT Ireland helpline are informed and that they will be able to take our call and will be able to respond to it, is great for us to have that to fall back on.
Yeah.
Great. So that non-judgmental, emotional support, active listening, that we're there to listen and support and help them, hopefully not to panic too much, and as we would support other callers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So important.
One other important question that has come through here on the chat, which is very much on what you're saying, I think, is how can you tell us more about how do intersex people, especially when they're younger, how do they figure it all out? Is it through the physical? Like, how do they get to understand who they are?
Well, in the past, I mean, there's a struggle. Like, you end up being brought down, like in the past, down the medical route, because of how your body is not developing the same way as the average child's body. So I suppose that's at that stage, that there's difficulty. But a lot of children are very emotionally very upset. I remember talking to one woman in particular, and her daughter hadn't left the room, and she was being bullied at school, and she literally would not come out of her room. She was only 15.
Yes.
And she was seriously worried that she would end up ending her life at 15.
Wow.
And she turned to us. But yeah, I mean, there would be a lot of emotional distress around with a lot of intersex teenagers, and suicide rates are very high. So with a lot of angst, I would say they come to terms with who they are. A lot of pain.
Yeah. Okay. So so in that sense, Olive, would it be fair to kind of summarize that most young people are figuring out, or their parents figure something out through like physical development not going as they would expect?
Yeah, that would be the average. Yeah,
But then if it's go ahead, please.
Sorry. And also, like the woman I was talking about, who didn't know anything, and was married to in a heterosexual marriage to a farmer, and suddenly couldn't get pregnant and had never had a period, and suddenly realized there was something amiss, and was diagnosed as intersex. So sometimes it can be when somebody is trying for a child. It can be at birth. It can be at puberty. There's different times in people's lives that they'll actually say, okay, there's something, and they'll go about it, usually through a doctor and medical. Intersex is medically diagnosed. And sometimes actually when after birth, I remember on one occasion actually after death, when they did a post-mortem, and the person had carried this their whole lives. They had never married, and they just got on with their life, but they weren't aware.
Right. Okay, so it's It's not something then that is always obvious, and it's something that people can be discovering about themselves at different stages in life and at different ages. So I suppose for our helpline volunteers to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And
sometimes it can be concealed by their parents. The parents may, I know we have one woman whose parents concealed from her the fact that she had had surgery, and she found out as an adolescent. And we also had that actually happened in a number of cases where the parents are told that that you fixed your child and everything's grand now and everything's fine. And again, now you are talking about 20 and 30 years ago. There was two different cases, but this they found out. But one found out as a young adult, and one found out in mid-teens.
Right.
So it varies. I mean, everyone's the thing about, I suppose, the sheer variation of our stories is the thing. The sheer, like you could find out at any age. But usually it would be at birth, at trying to have at puberty, trying to have a baby, or impregnate your partner, or that those really be the four times usually.
Right.
You know.
Okay. Thank you, Olive, so much for taking those questions. I think we've got through all of them. So thanks to everyone in the breakout rooms for the questions. Olive, we're coming to the end of our session. And so I just want to, I suppose, ask you, are there any parting or closing words or closing requests that you'd like to make or to share to all of us in LGBT Helpline and Gender Identity Family Support Line?
Yeah, just to say thanks very much. And because there will be, I mean, I was saying to yourself over the break, like we expect a flood of people to actually start coming out as they become more aware and feel freer to actually speak, and the invisibility goes, so that there will be, in the future, there will be an awful lot of calls from intersex people potentially, and thanks very much for everyone to give up their morning to come to this training. I really appreciate it, and it is very important to the intersex community that you are here. Thank you.
Olive, thank you very, very much, and on behalf of everyone in LGBT Ireland and the LGBT Helpline and Gender Identity Support Line, thanks for your time. We'll certainly update the volunteer information folders to have all of those contact details for Intersex Ireland. And as Bernie, chair of LGBT Ireland, said, if there's any ways in which Intersex Ireland and LGBT Ireland can be supporting each other, or any ways in which we can supporting your efforts, please know that we're here to support Intersex Ireland. Thanks so much, Olive, and hope the rest of your Saturday is lovely, and really appreciate your input, and look forward to connecting in with you again for another learning event or solidarity event or whatever it is.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Olive. And to everybody else,
thanks so much.
Thanks, Paula. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire.
Sorry, no, just thanks so much, Olive. It was absolutely amazing. And when we have our conference in person, I know you'd have a standing ovation right now. So just to say that it's hard online, but
thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Olive.
Great. So to everybody else, we're going to take our coffee break, folks, or your tea, whatever is your pleasure. Not yet the gin and tonics, hopefully, but sure, what can we do? You're in your own house. We don't know what you reach for. Just come back to us with concentration ability at about 11:45. So we're giving you a nice, healthy 30-minute break, just so that you can get your cup of tea, your fresh air, your stretching, because we are conscious that we're sitting online for the day. When you come back, we have another fantastic session coming up and some lovely Vox Pop videos as well. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the second half of our morning. Hope you all had a nice break. Before I hand over to Stephen, who will chair us through the second session, we're just going to have two more messages, celebratory messages from people in our community who you'll recognize and who just want to lend their congratulations to the helpline on our 10th anniversary. So please enjoy two more short Vox Pop messages.
Greetings from New York City and heartiest congratulations for 10 successful years of delivering an extraordinary service, the National LGBT Helpline. I want to thank especially the volunteers who have given of their time, their love, and their commitment to offering that listening ear, and especially during these pandemic times when we have so many people whose sense of loneliness has increased because of the isolation. So well done, congratulations, and have great celebrations for the extraordinary contribution that you have offered to our people.
A big, huge, massive congratulations to everybody at the National LGBT Helpline. It's your 10th anniversary, and what an incredible achievement. I think it's amazing the amount of work that the volunteers have done there over the last 10 years, with the support and advice for people who are ringing up the helpline, and also the services that they offer to so many organisations. Amazing also that the helpline continued on during COVID, and there was always somebody at the end of the line for somebody who needed to reach out. So congratulations to everybody there at your 10th anniversary.
Lovely. So from Catherine Zappone and Anna Nolan, well done, everybody. And let's keep going for another 10 years. And let's keep going with our conference. And Stephen O'Riordan, roll it there.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Stephen, and I'm the Services Development Coordinator, and I'm in the office here in Dublin at LGBT Ireland. So this section of the panel, we're going to be talking with Paul from Focus Ireland and Joanne from a Chrysalis community project in relation to homelessness and addiction. So Paul Kelly is the representative from Focus Ireland, and when we were preparing for this, just this week, I was looking at some of the information on, up-to-date information on homelessness. So we have 8,702 adults and children living in emergency accommodation in Ireland this week, today. Last year, it was 10,388 this time last year. So Focus Ireland this week published their 2019 annual report. And obviously, as we all know, it makes for very stark reading when we hear about homelessness in Ireland, which has been an epidemic in Ireland for many, many years. So Paul is going to talk to us today, and Joanne, around some of the things that they face in the services that they provide and how that might relate to affecting LGBT people in Ireland today. And so Paul and Joanne, you're very welcome. So I can see you, Joanne. I'm just waiting to see Paul. You're there if you'd like to wave at us.
How you doing? Are you well?
Great to see you, Paul. So you're very welcome.
Thank you.
So Paul, you're working for Focus Ireland. I previously have worked for Focus Ireland, and I've interacted with you on a few trainings. You've trained me on a few occasions, so it's lovely to see you. And I've referred to the Chrysalis Community Drug Project on a few occasions, Joanne. So it's such a small community, really, when you think about it.
It really is.
We'd really love to hear about sort of the knowledge and level of support that you provide to people who are experiencing homelessness and addiction. And then we might talk about the specific needs of LGBT plus people. So maybe you'd like to start us off perhaps by giving us an introduction on who you are and where you are in the country today.
My name is Joanne. I'm an addiction case manager at Chrysalis Community Drug Project. I've been working for Chrysalis now for 14 months, and I previously worked for them 10 years ago for 3 years also. I've worked in many different services, cross-care, I've worked in homelessness, I've worked for Dublin Simon, outreach team, I've worked for Advance and Ballyferma. Yeah, that's kind of me.
Great, thank you, Joanne. Paul, you'd like to introduce yourself?
How are you doing? My name is Paul Kelly. I am a Youth Services Manager for Focus Ireland. I've been managing services there for just gone 20 years there on the 1st of August this year. And I've managed everything bar the coffee shop in Focus Ireland at this stage. Specifically in relation to LGBTI, only last week, Focus Ireland launched the first ever study of homelessness and LGBTI in Ireland. It's a qualitative study because there's no statistics, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to many. So it's just useful that there is a paucity of research around this area. The one thing I don't want to do today is give you a load of stats. But I think in fairness, Stephen did give one there of 8,700. But what's interesting is Manchester is the same size as Ireland, and their homeless population is 5,600. So it's very interesting. It's like apples and oranges, but it's just in terms of population sizes, it's worth noting. Also, they've only one MP, and we have got an Oireachtas and a Shannon and what not. Everyone in the we've got a parish rep nearly in the Shannon.
So obviously the whole area of homelessness and addiction is as much a political issue as it is a societal and systemic issue. Look, the Focus Ireland report that was published, the first ever report on LGBTI plus young people's experiences of homelessness. It's a 128-page reading. There's
an executive summary.
Executive summary, thank God for those.
Yeah.
So that's definitely worth that. But I suppose one piece that I saw in that was around how homelessness affects LGBT people, which I thought was striking.
Probably we need to take a step back there first, Stephen, in terms of to put a little bit of context on becoming homeless. Because you become homeless, you experience homeless, and then you leave homelessness. And hopefully everybody leaves homelessness. And it's probably, for everybody who's here today, and thank you for asking me to be part of this, I just want you to image in your mind's eye what you understand as a homeless person. Quite quickly, I would say there's a number of elephants in the room, that it's somebody in a sleeping bag, somebody who is tapping on, if you're in Dublin, it's on O'Connell Bridge or in shop fronts, things like that. That's a very small percentage of homelessness. Because if you take the statistic that Stephen's given of 8,700, there ain't nearly 10,000 people tapping on O'Connell Bridge in Dublin. But when you do see someone tapping, do think about what does it take to have been stripped from you to actually have to sit down and put your hand out. Forget the cause or the relationship to drugs, and Joanne will talk about this, but just think about the level of self-esteem that must have been just stripped from you to actually put your hand out to another human being with a cup from Starbucks or wherever. But it's just useful to note that there's 4 basic types of homelessness, or causes, sorry, of homelessness. The first one's structural, and that's basically when you look at things like affordability of accommodation. So someone who's on, say, a clerical officer in the public service, for example, who's on a minimal salary, living in Dublin, been charged £2,000 a month for accommodation. If the landlord pops that accommodation, the rent up on that accommodation, as is his or her want, maybe another 500 quid, because we live in a capitalist society, they probably can't afford that accommodation. So there's a structural reason why they go into homelessness. Then you also have economic reasons, which are more related to poverty and the You've got the American system, which is no welfare, and then you have our system, which some have referred to as a nanny state. If we go straight into LGBTI, a personal coming out, you think about how someone who has identity or sexuality issues, first person they have to come out to them is themselves, but fundamentally they'll also come out then to their family and things like that. And regardless, like the Fundamental Rights Agency last year, I think they only published this year their stats for the country research in Ireland, we still have very high levels of homophobia and transphobia. So we might look great on paper, and I don't need to tell people on the helpline that there is high levels still of homophobia and transphobia in the country. So one of the things we noticed, for example, particularly in young people, when the day of the referendum and we brought in marriage equality, that Monday, I noticed in one of my youth services, a very large increase in young country males and females. I put it down to, I actually didn't know what to put it down to. And then about 2 or 3 days later, I was kind of thinking, what is going on here? And literally they had the courage to come out, but then their families put them out. So it's on surface we look good, but underneath when you scratch, we're still not great.
Yes.
So fundamentally, if someone was asked, what is the reason for your homelessness there? It would have been family breakdown. Whereas actually nobody asked, well, actually, what was the cause of the family breakdown? And it was the coming out process. Within that then, if they come into emergency accommodation, and I do manage emergency accommodation for under 18s. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So just so as people are aware, these are the 4 that research has shown us, the structural ones that I was talking about, good quality accommodation. Institutional, specifically in Ireland, young people leaving care. It is a national or it is an international feature as well, but Ireland appears to have a very high population of young people leaving the foster care system. We're also unique in Europe that 96% of the children, or 94% of the children we have in care is actually in foster caring, which is good, and not large institutions or smaller institutions of residential units. Prison and also mental health facilities. There's been very little research done on prisons in Ireland on LGBTI. A friend of mine is a director of a service that works with prisoners, and she also has started to notice this, so she's hoping to commission some research. Relationship causes and the personal causes. So these really do come into the realm of the interpersonal. And abusive relationships within, we do not give enough credence in the community to intimate partner violence or domestic violence and what happens there. And you will probably see that quite regularly or hear about it on the phones. And the family breakdown, which very much is related to us, it's very much around coming out and family rejection. And then the personal causes, in terms of the homeless population, and these are general, the homeless population is overrepresented with mental health, people with learning disabilities or learning difficulties, and problem drink and alcohol use. Particularly when it comes to problem drink and alcohol use, it is not always the cause, but it certainly is a survival mechanism. And I've often said to myself, if I was on the boardwalk, I would probably be drinking and taking drugs. So, and the thing here around the personal causes, they are risk factors. So they are not necessarily the primary avenue in, but they certainly will predispose anybody to it. And people don't give enough credence to the ability to pay mortgages and rent, etc. And certainly in the economic the crash that happened 10 years ago, economic homelessness has skyrocketed in Ireland. Almost 80% of people coming into homelessness at that point were for economic reasons. And where you tend to see that is with families and migrants who have come into Ireland to work in the economy because there wasn't enough workers, and they tend to be the first that will fall into the homelessness. Can you fire it on there? This is also very important to know. Ireland has poor definitions legally of homelessness. So the main thing was the 1953 Act, which only entitles you to shelter. That is not defined. And the traditional definition of that was anybody who lives outside of Dublin, it was called the county home. So I'm sure anybody who's from the countryside, every main town would have had the county home, which people traditionally called the nursing home, run by the HSE. That was the only legislative remit or protection for homeless people in Ireland. Then the Housing Act came in 1988 and defined homelessness for the first time. That is the primary legislation still to this day. And the Childcare Act literally puts, there's a section of the Childcare Act that if a young person under 18 becomes homeless, TUSLA must respond. How they respond is a different kettle of fish.
Mm-hmm.
And all the Housing Act does is it basically just says you cannot be reasonably expected to live where you're currently, if the accommodation is poor, or, the main thing here is it's in the opinion of the local authority. So one person could decide you're homeless and the other person might decide you're not homeless if you have options. So I thought it was just important to note that, because at the end of the day, it is the local authority or the council. They must accept you as homeless. If they don't accept you as homeless, you will not get any statutory services. You'll get the voluntary sector, but you won't get access to things like emergency accommodation. And also in Ireland, there's no right to housing. There's no constitutional right. There is a move afoot to try and get that into the constitution.
And of course, Paul, you know, sort of apart from sort of, you know, registering as homeless and having that be acceptable to the local accountability authority, we also have a huge portion of the population in those 10,000 statistics that I mentioned earlier who are actually not identified as homelessness because they may be couch surfing, they may be living with an aunt, with a friend, they may have come out recently and are staying with their sister. So those people are not captured or able to avail of services.
They're not, they're off the grid. So you have chronic homeless, which tends to be internationally and even in Ireland is defined as being homeless for more than 6 months. Mm-hmm. Then episodic, that's where you come in cycles. So you've been in, you leave, and you also have couch surfing, which is precarious. I'm sure plenty of people have done it in the past, but people can exit of their own resources. But what we tend to find, particularly in my experience amongst the LGBTI community, is they will access that resource in terms of going to friends, parents, things like that. Younger people tend to do that also. But eventually that'll wane out and then they'll have to enter the system. Very, very interestingly, females enter homelessness later than males. Females are far more resilient and are far more able to call on resources than males for some reason. There has been research in Ireland specifically around this.
So can I ask you, in terms of those options for people that are presenting as homelessness, what are the options for people that are at risk of homelessness in Ireland today?
So in terms of if someone is at risk of homelessness, so they're not homeless yet, one of the first things to do would be to find out what type of accommodation are they in. Is it local authority, private rented, or owned, mortgaged? If it's local authority and they're at risk of homelessness, people can contact, there is a social work department in every council in Ireland, and their job specifically is to prevent homelessness. So you can contact them. People don't realise that there are social workers in councils. They think they only belong to TUSLA. So the other thing is, if they're in private rented accommodation and there's a risk of being homeless, two options. One is the Residential Tenancies Board. You can refer to them and get onto them quite quickly. They can begin proceedings against a landlord if there's cause. The other one is you can contact Threshold. Now, I will send you on these details rather than putting them up on a slide.
Sure.
They have a prevention service and they will start to work with someone. The key thing here is, and in our experience, people tend to ring us if they've been issued a notice of termination, or that's the new term for it. It used to be called a notice to quit. They used to ring us the day before or the day of, at which point it is way too late down the track. You want to get in earlier. And that's human nature to, I'll get this fixed or to avoid. But there are options. There's also in the Dublin area, the 4 local authorities each have a service that is dedicated at prevention, because we realise get in quicker.
And of course,
outside of that, Louth has a service, Cavan has a service, Monaghan has a service. Galway do, but it's not as defined. Cork also has a service, and Limerick. So there are national services to deal with this. If a person becomes homeless, the first thing, obviously, if they're in dire need of emergency accommodation, they have to be accepted. So what will happen is, and we'll use Dublin as the example here, there is a thing called the free phone. So basically it's a telephone line, and you will be given a bed for a night. And that will be in a large congregate setting of a hostel. There is no hostels in Dublin that are small. They predominantly are 20 beds and above, right up to the 100 mark. They are in shared rooms. I'm one of the few places that actually has individual rooms in terms of a hostel. Then what needs to happen is they'll have to present to Dublin City Council, and a determination will have to be made. Now, when you start to think about this, they will have to bring PPS number, photo ID. They'll even have to go to the tax office. So there's things, the system in itself is quite cumbersome in terms of, because once you get registered homeless, you have to be put onto the housing list. So there's a whole process. If you are not from the area, and this is very important, so if you become homeless in Dublin and you're not from Dublin, you will not be granted, in terms of the local authority, ongoing emergency accommodation, in terms of, we'll give you a week in there. You work on a night-by-night basis. You'll be asked to return to your area of origin, because you have to prove what's called a local connection. And that is becoming more difficult. But that is because we would have a lot, and particularly when it comes to the gay community, we tend to congregate in cities. The red lights of the city bring us in. I'm not referring to the red light zone. I'm referring to, sorry, the bright lights even of the city. So we tend to congregate in cities. So if you're from Cork, you'll be told, back you go. And that's the system. For right or for wrong, that is the system. And it's an economic reason why this has occurred, because obviously Dublin can't be expected to solve the rest of the country's homelessness, as much as other local authorities will send people to Dublin.
That's a really great point, is that, you know, if you're not sort of acceptable in this sort of bureaucratic system that we seem to have with local authorities, it's really great that there are voluntary services out there like Focus Ireland, Chrysalis and others who take on people's cases, you know, and provide advice and information, and can maybe wiggle around a little bit in terms of services that local authorities would not be able to provide. So that, and
we can also fast track you maybe to, if you do have to go back to your area of origin, we'll tend to know what services are available. And then it's the other things when you do become homeless, it's what your basic needs. Like you wouldn't think this, but I've experienced people who sleep in their cars, but they'll come into one of my services to have a shower to go to work. They'll come in, they'll bring their own breakfast, they'll go to the gym. You know, that's what I'm saying. Get the image of a rough sleeper sitting at O'Connell Bridge out of your head, because that's a small proportion of homelessness. And I'm sure there's people here today that possibly may have been affected by this as well. So being homeless has a lot of stigma attached to it and a lot of shame. So if you're coming out as LGBTI, there's stigma and shame there. You're homeless, there's stigma and shame there. You put the two together and you've got pretty much of a minefield. And you possibly have mental health issues as well. So, and the research actually that we've done brought this out very, very, very well. And it's known as the double closet. People don't like telling that they've got mental health issues, and then they don't like to, when they're coming in to services, they don't want to say that they're gay or straight. So they're continually closeting themselves. And another key thing around this is it's about visibility. Now, in all services I manage, we would have the pride flag, etc. Colette has done training with us as well. We use the stickers. So that in itself is just enough to say, hey up, there's a crowd of ones in there, they might be half all right. It's just about creating a welcoming space That's what we try to do.
We think about also even people that are housed, when we talk about direct provision, you know, they're by law, in terms of the bureaucratic system we have, housed, albeit temporarily and in a very congregated setting. So that double closet of being both in the direct provision system, but also being an LGBTI person in the direct provision system, would you encounter many people who are homeless or would consider themselves homeless coming from a direct provision system that are LGBT? Would you consider that a double closet?
Absolutely. Anything, something, and people find this very difficult to either understand or accept. Exclusion begets exclusion. So there's a hierarchy of exclusion. So if you're, and there's theory to back this up, but what you tend to do is think about it as a human being, think about it here as a group of people ourselves. If you see someone who's different from you, you will either, traditionally speaking, you will not want to associate, and you'll associate with the in crowd. So then if you go into homeless services and you notice someone who's more vulnerable than you, or someone who has come out as gay, you'll target them. So whether you're gay yourself or not, it's irrelevant. You will actually target someone else to take the light off you. That is very, very dominant within homeless services. So Joanne will know this as well. Within the people who use drugs, you'll often hear them saying, I'm not on the needle, I'm no junkie. But they could be smoking 5 bags of heroin a day. And you're going, what's the difference between you smoking 5 bags of heroin and Mick over there injecting 5 bags of heroin? You know, there is a hierarchy which reinforces the exclusionary nature. And that message is very clear, that people will, you know, so they stay in the closet. Now, this is a very sad thing to actually say to someone who's on the journey to coming out and they come into homeless services. I've often had to say to them, you might want to pause that. And it's a very difficult thing to say, because you doing that, you don't have the support mechanisms, you don't have the support systems within the hostel environment. And it can be quite unsafe. And people might don't necessarily appreciate that.
Yes.
So that personal journey of someone coming, I'm ready to come out, and I'll always remember 10 years ago having to say to a youngster, you may get back into that closet as quick as you come out, because I knew where they were staying and I knew the environment.
Yes.
And unfortunately, they were sexually assaulted afterwards. Now, when they disclosed that, we were able to access the guide clinic in James's, but that was it. You know, that person shut down.
That's a tough call to have to make.
It is, and some people, and I certainly know in the gay community, I have heard people say we have to celebrate coming out and things like that. And from a psychology perspective, I'd be looking at going, sometimes that journey needs to be tempered. Yeah, it's about safety, and it's a very sad thing.
So let's talk about, I'm really struck by how much of a judgment call somebody has to make on that on a daily basis, and to have somebody, a professional, have to say to them, look, there are other priorities here, because the whole journey, personal journey of coming out is hard earned for people. So, and when that's mixed with homelessness, it becomes even more nuanced. So let's talk about the needs of people who are experiencing addiction. I think that's kind of a really relevant point. And we'll bring in Joanne. Would you like to kind of jump in on what you have heard so far?
Yeah, so just hitting on what Paul said there about young people within the community and being within the homeless services and coming out. I've experienced that myself, and telling people to kind of, you know, and it's awful, because I'm a very open-minded person myself, and to have to tell people, you know, mind yourself and tone it down a little bit, because you're in an environment where not everybody will be as accepting.
Yes.
And that in itself, the social stigma that comes with it, and it comes, and they've had that through all their life. And a lot of the time, it's even, I suppose, thinking of the LGBT community, even coming to terms with their own sexuality can be a huge thing. I've worked with many people. I've worked in the homeless services, and I am specifically addiction, but I have worked in the homeless services, so I do understand what Paul is talking about. I've worked with people who have slept rough through fear of staying in hostels from the LGBT community, and slept rough for a number of years. And again, use drugs to suppress, I suppose, the dual diagnosis, to self-medication of themselves throughout the years. The social stigma, I mean, it is getting so much better. And I think the communities are really opening up to the LGBT community, and we're getting an awful lot more knowledge, and it's amazing and it's great. But again, I was listening to the lady earlier on, the lady that was speaking on Intersex, and she was talking about how different it is in hospitals and the Catholic Church having a handle on that. I've actually experienced that firsthand. I'm a mother of a lesbian girl, and she suffered extremely bad with her mental health. At the age of 16, she came out to me quite young because I'm a very open person. And when I took her to see a mental health team, it was horrific. It was horrific how he spoke to her, how patronizing he was to her, that I actually took her out and paid for privately weekly. It was just, it blew me away. But I suppose getting back to Chrysalis and what we're about.
You're saying, Joanne, that kind of with the people that you've worked with have presented it with different kind of dual diagnosis, varied diagnosis, and that 90% of LGBT people struggle with their mental health. So that's quite a significant number of people that you work with.
It is, and it just, I suppose, over the last, say, 10 years, when people are getting a little bit more confident about talking about it, well, I wouldn't say confident, but, you know, slowly unraveling, and when you get to know someone as a case manager, it can take time to build that relationship. And I suppose I've had many different extremes. I've had a lady who came from the traveling community, and she was in fear of going into the hostels because there was so many traveling community in the hostels. And because she had presented as a gay woman, she was even in fear because she had been given a horrific attack by her own family, that she was left with physical impairments for the rest of her life. That woman is now dead. She slept rough for a number of years, self-harmed, dual diagnosis. The mental health services just weren't there to support her. There wasn't enough appointments. There wasn't enough understanding of it. And quite ignorantly myself at that time. And that's when I started to try and educate myself a little bit more around it and understanding around it. I do think services are slightly changing. Well, community services, without a doubt. I'm talking about HSC services. I do think they're slightly changing. But I do think, you know, Paul spoke about it there with the CPS. I had a young lad who presented to the service, no drug or alcohol issues, but extremely distressed. And obviously I wasn't going to turn him away from the service. He was a young gay man. He had told his father had put him out, and he was terrified of going into the homeless services. So I rang the CPS, the Central Placement Service. I explained the situation, specifically asking for a room on his own because he was very distressed. And, you know, without putting a label on people, he was quite camp. So it was quite obvious, you know, and I was fearful for myself going into a hostel where there can be shared rooms. And he was very distressed on this particular day. They couldn't accommodate. They couldn't accommodate. Yeah. He hadn't told anybody else, friends, distant family members, and he felt he'd no one to turn to. And as, I suppose, a professional myself, I felt quite hopeless. So I could only imagine how he felt.
Yes. And as a case worker, Joanne, you've mentioned, you know, kind of in your presentation today around, you know, coming into services where maybe you haven't touched drugs or drink ever in your life, and then you go into these services and, you know, they're there at the drop of a hand. You can, you can start, as you start exploring your sexuality, your own sexual behavior, you know, you come into contact perhaps with different types of drugs and different experiences. Can you give us a sense of the So maybe some of the drugs or some of the kind of risky sexual behavior that some of your clients might experience as they go through homelessness?
I had one particular gentleman I worked with, and I worked with him for a number of years. He presented as a heterosexual male in a relationship with a child. He eventually, his drug use was so extreme at that time, they became homeless. The relationship broke down. She went back to family members, and eventually he got recovery. And this lasted really well for 3 years. And I moved services. And last August, I came up against this man again in a clinic that I do an in-reach clinic in. He was extremely dependent again. He was a very different man, extreme dual diagnosis. It was mind blowing to see the change in him. So anyway, I started working with him again, and when the relationship had built up again, he eventually explained to me that he had always thought he was gay. And he had started exploring in, the gay community. And not having much knowledge around that and trying to keep everything, he ended up at a party, which again, I wouldn't be hugely knowledgeable around, but he explained it as what he called a daddy party, right? He went to the party, there was many substance there, but he hadn't taken any yet because it was his first experience.
Yes.
And the next thing he remembers is waking up in a sauna room, tied up with extreme